Today we are concluding our series on birth order from a biblical perspective. We're talking about the only child. There's a lot of myths that go around about the only child. It's called the myth of the only child syndrome, but basically there is no research to prove that. Siblings do not really improve the personality type. There's no research behind that, and parents may think, well, if I just have another child, my kid will get better. Well, actually, personalities of an only child and the firstborn are not really that much different. As a matter of fact, Kevin Lehman, one of the authorities, we could say, on birth orders, says that an only child is a firstborn in triplicate. They just are super firstborn children. The main difference for the children may be socialization. The firstborn naturally gets along better in a social situation because they've had more experience in it. Well, what about the only child? There's a couple of things that the only child will never experience. One of them is sibling rivalry. They never have anyone else to compete for their parents' attention. And the other thing is dethronement. Just like the baby, no one will ever come along to take their place. They will always be the only. They'll always be the one who have all of their attention. The only child, sometimes called the lonely child, or maybe the special only. They have the best and the worst of both worlds. They're the super achiever of the firstborn, and they're the pampered baby of the lastborn. And they get all of their parents' attention, the best and the worst of all parents have to give. All of their love, all of their anger, all of their criticism, all of their inheritance, everything a parent has to give is centered in on that only child. So the key to understanding an only child is to discover, why are they only? Is it because they're the special jewel of the Nile? Maybe the parents wanted more children, but it just didn't happen. They were not able to have more children. And often these children come along as parents are older, or they may even be an adopted child. And they're probably sheltered and kept from reality in a lot of ways. They may have a lifelong problem of being self-centered because they've never had to share anything. And they may think that if they don't get their way about something, that someone's treating them unfairly. Another reason they could be an only child is because it's the parental plan. Prior to the 1980s, if you happen to be born back before then, and as an only child, well, you were probably treated as a little adult. But today, the families are getting smaller. And as a matter of fact, since 1960, when the average family has grown, was 1 to 4, 4 children back in the 1960s, an American family today is typical of only having 2 children. But the only child is the fastest growing segment in our society today, with the typical American family in 20 to 30% only having 1 child. Well, let's look at a couple of only children from the Bible. Samson, that strong hero whom God used mightily to defeat the Philistines for the Israelites. It's probably a story that's so familiar to a lot of you. And we think about how Samson came in with his personality. Not only did God use him, but he had a lot of firstborn qualities. He knew what he wanted to do. He was successful. He was driven. He was an overachiever. He got things done the way he wanted to get things done. Well, a lot of that happened in his later years. Let's take a look at how Samson really got started with his personal battle with those Philistines. Samson, from birth, was to be a Nazarite, someone who did not drink any wine, did not touch any dead bodies. and he was to never have his hair cut. Those are the three we know about Samson and Delilah. Well, this is before Delilah came along. Samson's just a young man, and he goes down to Timnah, and he sees one of the Philistine women. He sees her, and he falls in love at first sight. Goes home, tells his parents, I have seen a woman of the Philistines, and I want her. Go get her for me as a wife. That's what he tells her. And the only children have a positive relationship with their parents, both in childhood and in adulthood usually. It's usually easy for them to go visit their parents or whatever. Not that they're going to spend any more time with them as far as living with them, taking care of them, but they have a good relationship with their parents throughout life. And his father said, look, are there no Jewish girls that we can get you? Why do you want to go and get one of the daughters of the Philistines? Why not get one of our own nationality? And Samson said, get her for me because she pleases me. Now, the parents of an only child will screen their children. They want to know who are your friends, where have you been, all of that. They want all the details. And Samson said, this is what I want. And because he was that jewel of the Nile rather than parental plan, he was spoiled. And that's what happens when you're spoiled. You get what you want. And Samson got what he wanted. His parents took him to see his bride-to-be. Along the way, while he's going there, he and his family get separated for who knows what reason, and he's by himself, and a lion comes out. This lion comes roaring toward him, and the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Samson, and Samson kills that lion just as easily as if it had been one of the goats. I mean, nothing in his hand, he just killed him. But he didn't tell his parents. You see, while they have a good relationship, parents don't always understand children. And Samson knew, this is just something I can't talk to mom or dad about. And not only could he not talk to mom or dad, a lot of times only children don't have anyone else to tell their secrets to. And so they just keep them inside. They become very private persons. Samson and his parents meet the bride-to-be, and sure enough, a wedding is scheduled. The wedding is scheduled to take place a few months down the road. On the way to the wedding venue, Samson goes aside and leaves mom and dad and checks out that lion to see if it's still there. Well, not only is it there, but a swarm of bees have come and took up habitation, formed a hive, made some honey. Samson dips some out. And when he gets to the wedding, not being in his hometown, the bride has picked out all of the wedding party, and he has 30 guys in his wedding party, 30 men of the Philistines. And so, wanting to be the center of attention, the way most only children do, he made a riddle. And he said, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. See, they're smart. He could think of things just like that. And usually the only child is very quick, very intelligent. Well, the men didn't like this. You see, what he had bet them was, I will bet each of you a change of clothing. I'll give you a new outfit, all 30 of you, each one of you. And if I lose, or you lose, then each of you give me a new outfit. Well, the men felt threatened. And they threatened then to burn the bride's house down unless she got the answer out of him. You see, he was sensitive about having his own way. He didn't care what the other people thought. Even though he didn't know these people, he wanted to show how smart he was. He wanted to stand out, and he was sensitive about having things his own way, thinking, the bride may have planned the party, but I'm the groom, and this is my wedding. and he wanted everyone to know that he was still a little bit in charge of it. Well, when the men threatened to burn the house down that belonged to her father, the bride went to Samson and said, "Please tell me." He said, "Look, I haven't told even my mom and dad. I can't tell you." For 7 days, she cried, trying to get Samson to tell her the answer. You see, Samson did not grow up learning how to be nice to his siblings. He didn't have to be nice to mom and dad either because they gave him everything he wanted. So, he did not, like many only children, go out of his way to be nice or to offer his support to anyone else. It did not bother him at all that she cried for 7 days, except it was getting on his nerves. And finally, when it got on his last nerves, he told the answer. But only children just do not come up and be that supportive friend oftentimes because it's more about them. So they answered Samson's riddle. And when they did, he knew that his bride had told them, and he became furious. And because of never dealing with siblings, he's self-centered by default. And he's used to getting his own way no matter what happens. And so even a small disappointment can become a personal attack. And he's very disappointed if he's denied anything. You know, he didn't need those clothing. Many times the only children have everything they need, but he was denied getting it. He was denied winning. He was denied saying, "I'm smarter than you." And so that just really infuriated him. And anger started to rise up. Well, then he went to Ashkelon and said the Spirit of the Lord came upon him because it was God's desire all along to defeat the Philistines. And there Samson killed 30 men and took their clothing and gave them to those 30 men who had answered his riddle. They're overachievers, and they're used to things going smoothly. So the minor problem was a disaster. And not only that, because parents don't admit their mistakes or apologize, the children don't learn how to either. And what did Samson do after he killed those men and fussed at his bride? He was angry, and so he went back to his father's house, and his wife was given to the best man. If they're not given the attention, an only child may just take their toys and go home. They may give up completely if they can't be perfect or succeed in everything that they try to do. Then later on, he wanted to make amends, but it was too late there. This is the one problem that the only child faces more than any other, is that it's difficult to forgive both themselves and others. And they have a great problem with God's grace and forgiveness. They want to control sometimes even who God can forgive, thinking, they were so bad, they hurt me so deeply. God, it's not right that you forgive them. And so it's something that they deal with throughout their lifetime. Well, you might say, I don't want to be an only because they have so many problems. Well, I wanted to show you that side first, because we're going to end up with Esther, Queen Esther. And you know what? We're going to see that the only child has so many good qualities, and that's what I want to leave you with. You know, oftentimes when we think about the only child, she might be called Her Highness or His Highness, and they act like royalty. Well, you think about Queen Esther, King Josiah. Yeah, they both were royalty. They just normally have a sense of security, and they're very secure about their place in the family. There's a basic sense because they've always been taken care of, and they're confident because they've never had to compete for adult attention. When the story of Esther starts, we see that she's not a queen yet. She's just a young girl. She's an orphan, raised by her cousin Mordecai. He has kept her at home after her parents died, and she is living there when King Ahasuerus and his wife have a split. He divorces her and says, I want another wife. And so he sends throughout all of his kingdom for all of the beautiful young virgins to come and go through a period of preparation and selection. Esther was one of those young women. She arrives at the palace. When she gets there, she is put under the custody of the king's custodian of the women. And she obtained favor from him. He saw her spirit. He saw her beauty. And he gave her extra beauty treatments. He gave her the best of the servants. And he even moved her and all of her servants to the very best quarters. Everything that she needed was taken care of. Not because she begged for it, but because of her manner. The only child takes care of their appearance. They are the well-dressed, the one that looked like they just stepped out of a fashion magazine. You might say, well, anybody could do that if they knew how to dress. Well, let me tell you, it came time to visit the king, and each one could take whatever they desired with them. When Esther's turn came, she only requested what the person over the woman advised, and she obtained favor. You see, it's like this. You can send 2 men or 2 women into a clothing store, give them the exact same amount of money to spend, and depending on their personality and birth order, they will come out with different clothes, with different possessions. An only child just has that innate ability to know, this is right. This is what looks good on me, and this is what looks good in general. They have a good self-esteem, and they're confident and self-assured. And one good thing is they're very comfortable in social settings. Now, sometimes the younger ones, when they're children, they're not too comfortable because they've never had siblings or anyone to teach them. But they have an early sense of maturity, and that really played off well in Esther's behalf because King Ahasuerus loved Esther more than any other. And he put the crown on her head, and I can tell you, she knew how to wear it. She walked with royalty. She walked with dignity. He made a feast in her honor and proclaimed it the Feast of Esther. And he proclaimed a holiday. Now, here is a Jewish girl who had never been in the palace before, never been to a royal feast. Yet, she had the ability. She had the IQ, she had the sense within her to know how to act in all of those situations. And that's something that the only child just naturally knows. An only child is very careful to follow directions. They do not want to displease their parent or any of the older ones. And so Esther had not revealed to the king that she was a Jew. Why? Because her cousin Mordecai had told her not to. And so doing this, they carry the weight and pressure of their parents because they want to do everything that will make them happy. And they have expectations, and no matter how successful the only child may be, they still have fear that somehow they might disappoint the one, their parent or their guardian, ever who would raise them. And so later on, a problem arises. Not just a little problem like Samson had a few minutes ago. We're talking a disastrous problem that was in reality a disaster. You see, not knowing that Esther was a Jew, the king agreed with Haman, who had been snubbed by Esther's cousin Mordecai, that all the Jews should be killed. And, The Jews were so distressed. All of them went into prayer and fasting, and they put on sackcloth and ashes. And Esther heard what Mordecai was doing, and so she sent garments to him, saying, let me send you some clothes. Let me help you out. They have this nurse mentality. They want to fix people's problems. But Mordecai didn't. He would not accept that. And so she sent her servants to learn what was going on to them. And there she is. She's agonizing over his problems the way an only child does, quietly and sometimes not so quietly. They want to get in there, and they just want to fix things because they know if it was left to them, and if you'll tell me what's going on, I know I can do it, and I know I can do it right. Just let me fix it. So the servant did Mordecai did tell the servant everything that was happened to him. He told them all about the money that was being paid into the treasury. He told them all about how the Jews were going to be destroyed. And then he asked for Esther's help. Well, now, an only child might think they can do it all, but still yet they're cautious and they're fearful of trying new things. And they really worry too much. I don't know if I can do this. She said, anyone who has gone into the inner court to see the king without being called, there's only one law, death. Unless he holds out his scepter, and he's not called me for 30 days. I just don't know if I can do this. You see, they're used to their own well-defined structure. They don't like surprises because they want to be in control. They're not spontaneous or flexible. And so sometimes they even feel incompetent because they've only had adults as role models who never failed, and they're afraid, what if I fail? But then, I'm a problem solver. That's what only children do. Only children know how to solve a problem. And so she said, tell you what, you fast for me 3 days and 3 nights. Don't eat or drink anything. And I'll get all of my servants, we'll do the same. And then I'll go see the king. And if I perish, I perish. She's a little bit fearful still, but she has a plan and she knows, and that's why she said to fast. She says, I know that if this is God's will, that he's going to help me, and I can do what might seem impossible. Well, they're very self-reliant, and they have a lot of planning skills, and they pay enormous attention to details. If you are an only child, you just look at those details, and it really bothers you to see something undone. Esther does go before the king. And I'm sure she put a lot of thought into what she wore that day as she did the first night they met. And he holds out the scepter. And he says, Esther, queen, what do you want? And she says, well, king, if it please you to grant my request, will you and Haman, the same guy that's going to murder me, only she didn't say that, will you guys come to a feast tomorrow that I'm going to give in your honor? See, they're very thoughtful. They've got everything structured. They've got everything planned. And so they come to the feast, and the next day, he says, all right, here's this feast. What do you want? And I'll give it to you. I'll even give you half my kingdom. And she says, well, if it pleases the king, will you and Haman come back tomorrow to another feast? And then I'll tell you my request. You see, they're very logical and conscientious and successful. She knew that Haman had a hook into the kings that would not be easy to break. She knew that he had planted a lot of seeds against the Jews that needed to be explained. And so she did it very logically. And so that day when he said, what's your request? I love you, Esther. I'll even give you up to half my kingdom. And then she says, if it pleases the King, life me and life my people. She'd been very careful, and she succeeded. Out of a need, not just to please others, not just to succeed for herself, but to help other people. That's what onlys want to do. They want to please and help other people. They have a real heart for that. And so whether you're an only like Samson, and your life has been wrapped up in me, and self-centered, or you can become an only child like Esther, who gave her life, was willing to lay it down to help other people. The only's children have so much within them, such a great heart to give, and God wants to use you. He wants you to know that He has so much for you. As we close this session on the birth order from biblical perspectives, I want to give you some takeaways in our last session. Your order of birth will have a lifelong effect on who you are. But remember, birth order is not a formula, and understanding it will not automatically solve all of your problems or even stop the personality clashes that you might be experiencing with others. Birth order does not give the total picture of anyone. And since there is no birth order that is any better or worse than any others, it's not written in stone. There's a lot of variables to it. And because of that, we cannot predict how anyone is going to act. It's not something that is going to predetermine your life. And then we have to realize that how we're treated by our parents growing up will have a key impact on how we display the characteristics of our birth order. And finally, and most importantly, each birth order does have its own set of unique weaknesses and strengths. But the important thing with all of this is, as we recognize within us weaknesses and strengths, and we're going to see some of both because no one's perfect, we have to know that the God who created us and chose which order we would be born in is also the God who can empower us to strengthen our weaknesses and to strengthen our strengths. He wants you to know that He created you perfect, and He has a wonderful plan for your life.